Welcome. This video covers the information needed to create your crop planning model. The next several training videos will walk through the production planning process. Before we get started, let's put up some fence posts to keep from straying. Start simple. Most information needed to create crop plans are management decisions, not data. So use the best available information now. When better information is found, update your plan. Get a baseline strategy to use as a starting point, then incrementally add layers of detail. Plans are easily modified and evolve over time. Let's start at step 1. For training, we'll use this completed template. The first time through, it's best to complete the template to organize your information. This saves time. Then focus on the software. Download the template here. There's also a completed sample template available for download. First, decide whether to start off planning by fields or by acres. This is how Planting Profits knows which optimization algorithms to use. Check Fields to find the most profitable combination of crops, fields, and acres with only one crop assigned per field. A field will not be split unless you split it. You can start planning by either fields or acres, then switch. We'll see later that sometimes analyzing by fields and acres can show you when splitting one or more fields, if feasible, can increase profitability. If planning by acres, write down the number of available acres and skip entering any field information. Later, to switch your plan to fields, just enter the field information. Everything else is the same. Income goal is next. Income goal is the sum of fixed costs, living expenses, and additional income. Income goal is a benchmark to compare against a strategy's estimated income. It does not affect the analysis. List the crops you're considering planting and their units of measure. For each crop, write down yield and price forecasts and variable production costs. The expected yield, price, and the variable production costs are required. Minimum and maximum yields and prices are optional. They're used for risk analysis, a topic we'll get to a little ways down the road. Use the best sources you have, like farm records, your agronomist, seed dealer, neighbors, county extension, etc. Any difference in yields, prices, or variable production costs can be analyzed as a different crop. For example, corn following corn is a different crop than corn following soybeans, since variable production costs are likely different and expected yields may be different. Irrigated cotton is a different crop than dryland cotton, since yields are different, yield variance is different, and production costs are different. Contracted barley is a different crop than uncontracted barley, since price and price variance is different. Growing wheat on rented land is a different crop than growing wheat on your own ground, since production costs, given cash rent, are higher, or estimated net yields, given crop share, are lower. Later, after developing a strategy, you can circle back and layer on additional crop information, such as minimum and maximum crop yields and prices for risk analysis. Additional estimated income from co-products, government payments, conservation practices, or additional costs. Designators for conservation practices and high-risk crops. If needed, there's a template for estimating variable production costs and links to area crop budgets. List your fields and field size. Enter what was last planted in the field last season. This is optional to keep track of rotations. It does not influence the analysis. At the top of the columns, put down the crops you are considering planting. Next, put a mark on all possible crop and field combinations. If you have planting intentions, for each field, put an O in the cell for the crop you intend to plant in that field, and put an X in the cell of any other crops you would consider planting in that field. If you don't have any solid intentions for a field, put an X in the cells for each crop you are considering planting in that field. You can make all crops eligible to be planted in all fields. On the other hand, some crops may only be eligible to be planted in certain fields due to rotations or other considerations. If, for a given field, there is only one crop choice, then just select that one crop. No other crops will be considered for that field. If a crop does not do well in a particular field, leave it out of consideration for that field. The column on the far right is the number of crop choices for each field. If you're interested, it can be used to calculate the number of crop and field combinations. This example operation has 8,748 crop field combinations. That's a lot of possibilities. Resources are needed to grow crops. Resources include land, working capital, labor, water, equipment, or any other controllable input that may limit your crop mix. Resources create constraints, which limit profitability. Most resources are controllable. Land and working capital are the minimum resources needed to create a plan. Resources have two parts: the amount available and the per acre use for each crop that uses it. The acreage was previously captured, so we have that. Write down the amount of working capital available. In our example, this is $600,000. For many producers, this is an operating loan. The variable production costs for each crop were previously captured, so that is accounted for. All other resources are optional. When you start, begin with land and working capital. Then, layer on other resources to evolve your plan by adding rows to the table for more resources as needed. For our example, we'll include optional resources for irrigation water and specialty corn storage. The irrigation water is used by all crops in different amounts, while the specialty corn storage is only used by that crop. Let's look at the water resource. All crops are irrigated. Since water can be a limiting resource for this operation, it is included in this plan. The water resource is shown as a row. The amount of irrigation water resource available is 80,000 acre inches. This is each crop's per acre water requirements. Notice that both units of measure for the availability and crop use are both in acre inches. For the corn storage resource, there is 80,000 bushels of on-farm storage. So, the acreage of specialty corn cannot exceed 80,000 bushels. The per acre resource use for the corn storage is the yield. In this case, 160 bushels per acre. For all other crops, the amount of crop storage used is 0. Further guidance is available on our website that shows how to include optional resources in your plan, such as labor, rental land, nutrients, chemicals, machinery, and more. One more thing with regard to crop resource use. If there are material differences in crop yields or crop resource use among fields, you can use the crop field differences to account for this. To keep it simple, bypass this for now. We'll circle back to crop and field differences in a later training. In planting profits, contracted crops are a different crop than a non-contracted crop, since there is price certainty. Contracted crops can be either firm or proposed. Crops under a firm contracts will always be assigned at least the required amount of acreage to meet the obligation, even if this is less profitable than assigning the acreage to a different crop. For firm contracts, there must be enough resources, such as land and working capital, to produce the contract quantity of the crop. And if you're planning by fields, there must be enough acreage available among the fields that could grow that crop. If you have already decided to go with a contract, put it in the model as firm. For proposed forward sales, the crop will only be assigned acreage if it is more profitable than assigning another crop to that acreage. Proposed forward sales may be partially filled as part of the most profitable combination of crops, acres, and fields. When planning by fields, for firm or proposed contracts, planting profits may plant additional acreage beyond the contract amount in order to plant the entire field to the contracted crop, since the field cannot be split. This will generate some quantity of open or non-contracted crop. There are no agronomic differences between the amount of crop forward sold and the amount of crop that's open. If you're planning by acres, Planting Profits will never assign acreage beyond the amount of firm or proposed forward sales. If you have a contract that has different types of pricing, depending on quality, timing, etc., create a new crop to represent this contracted crop, then treat it like any other. Now list crops under consideration for forward sales. List the units of measure. Put an X in the column for proposed or firm. Write down the contract price offer and either the amount of acreage or the contract quantity. Add rows to the table for more contracts as needed. Crop acreage limits limit the acreage that can be assigned to a crop or group of crops. Crop limits can be used when planting by acres or fields. Crop limits ensure strategies include the minimum and maximum acres of a particular crop or group of crops. Crop limits can be used to evaluate crop diversification. Crop limits can impact expected income and more. Keep in mind, number 1, if you have minimum acreage limits or firm forward sales, there must be enough available acreage to meet minimum acreage limits. Also, there must be sufficient working capital and other optional resources, as applicable, to meet minimum acreage limits. Number 2, if a crop limit is reached, it is critical. Critical crop limits affect expected income. List all crops. For each crop, put down the minimum and maximum acreage or percentage that could be planted. Discretionary acres is the difference between the total available acres and the total of the minimum crop acreage limits. It provides a measure of planning flexibility. It does not affect the analysis. Acreage limits reflect management decisions that can easily be changed. Thank you for your time. For more information, please go to www.plantingprofits.com or drop us an email.